Good afternoon and welcome back to Stories with Don, reading Robin Hood. Actually, we are finishing Robin Hood. All good things must come to an end at some point, and so does this story. And so we are on the last chapter, chapter 24, and it is entitled Robin Hood Shoots His Last Arrow. For some time, Robin Hood was very happy in the service of the king. Then Richard left England again, and Robin found life at court very dull. More than that, he was not on friendly terms with Prince John, that false, cruel, cowardly man who later became King John, the most worthless king that England has ever known. Now, Prince John was always plotting to seize the throne, and he sent messengers to sound Robin Hood to find out if Robin and his bold archers would be willing to support Prince John against his brother Richard. But Robin was full of rage at the thought of such base treachery, and sent back a reply which caused Prince John to hate him bitterly. One lovely morning in May, Robin was walking through the streets of London, and thinking how beautiful his beloved forest of Sherwood would look on such a day as this, and how wearisome it was here, cooped up inside the walls of London town. He walked on to Finsbury Fields, and there stood to watch the young men shooting at the butts. The twang of the bows, the whistle of the arrows, the sweetest music in his ears fired his blood, and he resolved to go once more to Sherwood and hunt in its glades. So he and Maid Marian, with Little John and Will Scarlet, slipped secretly from London and set out for the forest. They had to leave the city quietly, or Prince John would have prevented them from going, and now that his brother was abroad, John held great power in his hands. Oh, how delightful it was to regain the old haunts, where the great harts and the dun deer ran through the woodland glade, and the sun seemed to shine twice as brightly as amid the dirty city streets. Forth they went to hunt, and Robin, with a single shaft, slew a mighty hart, and felt himself once more a woodman, gay and free. So they spent some happy days, when one morning a man came running frantically through the oaks to the camp under the trysting oak, and when they saw it was Much, their old and trusty comrade. "Save you, master, and beware," cried Much to Robin, "for King Richard is dead in France, and King John is now the ruler of the land." "Ah," said Robin, "and he is King John at last. This tiding bodes no good to me." "You speak truth, master," said Much, "for one of his first commands has been that you are to be seized and cast into hold, and of this I have hastened to tell you." "A thousand thanks, my faithful Much," cried Robin. "Then once more I am an outlaw in the greenwood. Welcome to our merry old life. 'Tis 1,000 times happier and more joyous than to live in the gayest palace a town can afford. Hail to the forest glade! Hail Sherwood!" And Little John and Scarlet echoed their master's cry, and waved their bows for joy to think that the old days had come back again, for both were weary of guard-room and city street. So Robin Hood became an outlaw once more in the depths of Sherwood Forest, and swiftly his men slipped back to rejoin him, until all the old faces were seen in the ring about the evening fire, as Allan a Dale thrummed to them on the harp and sang the sweet songs of the North Country. But a time of fierce storm and stress followed, for King John was a far more terrible enemy than the Sheriff of Nottingham had ever been. He sent force after force of trained soldiery to beat the forest recesses and drive the outlaws out. Many a wild skirmish was fought out among the great oaks. Sometimes the outlaws won, sometimes they lost and were compelled to flee before the king's men, but conquered they never were. Year after year passed, and still they lay in hiding among the thickets, and not one failed in faith and devotion to the dauntless Robin Hood, their trusted leader. Then King John died, and all England was full of joy to think that the hated tyrant had gone. Yet was none so joyous as the hunted outlaws, who had lost their worst and bitterest enemy, and could now have a little peace. So time passed on, until, as the old ballad says, Robin dwelled in greenwood 20 years and 2. And in this time Robin saw many changes. He lost his beloved partner, Maid Marian, and many an old comrade had been laid to rest beneath the mighty oaks. But still Little John, his faithful lieutenant, was at his side, and master and man hunted the dun deer over hill and dale. Then came a time when Robin Hood felt that his strength was failing. His great yew bow became too stiff for him to bend. The whistling shaft did not travel to the old range, and he felt listless and ill at ease. In this state of mind and body, he remembered that he had a cousin, the Prioress of Kirkley, who was deeply skilled in the medicine of the time. He said to Little John that he would go to the nunnery over which his cousin ruled and ask her to bleed him, for in those days people believed that many diseases could be cured by letting blood. He set out at once for fair Kirkley, but on the way he was taken ill, and he was very weak when he arrived at the door. His cousin welcomed him with open arms and offered food and drink, but Robin replied that he would neither eat or drink until he had been bled. So the prioress led Robin to a small room high up in the house, and there she opened the veins of his arms with a lancet, and the blood ran freely. Now Robin was in the hands of a friend, thought he was in the hands of a friend, but in truth he was in the grip of a treacherous enemy. The prioress was a close friend of some of Robin's bitterest foes, and had promised them to do him an ill turn if ever she had the power. Her chance had now come, and the wicked woman made the most of it. She bled her helpless guest until he lay weak and fainting. At length Robin revived a little and tried to leave the room to which the prioress had conducted him, but he found the door was locked, and no one answered his outcries and knocking. And now he began to suspect the truth, that he had been shut up there to bleed to death. He dragged himself to the window and flung open the casement, but he was so weak that he could not leap down. So there was one thing at hand, the thing that had so often brought strong hands and stout hearts to his rescue when sore bestead, his bugle horn. He knew that Little John was awaiting him in the forest near at hand, and he raised the horn and blew it thrice. But such short, feeble blasts, the faintest echo of the full, rousing notes with which he had so often caused the woodland to ring. But his faithful follower was on the alert and caught the faint sounds. Sitting under the tree, Little John barely heard the horn. "I fear my beloved master is near death," he said. "He blows so weak a blast." So he sprang up and ran to Kirkley Hall as fast as he could put his feet to the ground. He came to the great door and knocked loudly. No one answered. No one even came to look out the lattice beside the door to parley with him. Again he knocked until the place rang with his heavy blows. No answer. Then the giant felt sure that there was foul play somewhere, and he glanced about for means of entry. He looked at the windows, but they were very small and iron barred. Then his eye fell on a great log of oak, a piece of timber which 2 ordinary men could scarce lift. The giant sprang at it, caught it up, and smote the door a thundering crash of a blow which burst all locks and bars as if they'd been straws and sticks, and beat the door from its hinges. As the door clattered on the pavement of the hall, Little John leapt in and rushed about, shouting, "Master, master, where are you?" He listened, but the silence was perfect. The nunnery seemed as quiet as the house of the dead. He called again, and now a faint voice answered him from above. He rushed upstairs and again heard the call, and ran to the door of the room whence it came. The door was locked, but Little John burst it open with his knee and sprang in. "What is this, master?" he cried. "Treachery, I fear me. Thou art bleeding to death." "Aye, Little John," said the dying man slowly, "my time has come." Little John fell upon his knee beside his beloved leader. Then one last boon I crave of thee, dear master, he said sternly. What boon is it that thou dost beg of me, Little John? Asked Robin Hood. It is that I may burn Kirkley Hall and its nunnery, and consume this nest of traitors with fire. Nay, quoth Robin Hood, I cannot grant that boon, for never have I injured a woman or a man in woman's company. Give me my bow, and I will shoot a broad arrow. Where that arrow falls, I would have my grave dug. Little John raised his master and bore him to the window. Long and fondly the dying man looked on the woodlands he had loved so well, and then, with a last effort, he collected all his remaining strength and placed an arrow on the string, drew the feather home, and loosed it. He smiled as the bow twanged full and deep, and his ear caught the sound in which had been the sweetest music in the world to him. Here's a picture of him and Little John at the window. Lay me where the arrow drops, he murmured. Bid my true hearts dig me a deep grave, and lay a green sod under my head, and my good bow at my side. Little John nodded, for he could not speak, and with his eyes fixed on the greenwood, Robin Hood died in the arms of his faithful follower. So died Robin Hood. But his fame did not die with him. Age after age and generation after generation, his memory lingered among the common people, who loved to recall his famous exploits and doings of his great followers. Kings and nobles were forgotten, or their deeds recorded only in musty books which none but scholars read. But minstrels and rhymers made ballad after ballad of the doings of Robin Hood, and these ballads lived on the lips and in the hearts of the people. They were sung or recited on holidays and at merrymakings, and no rhymes were so popular as those which told of this true English hero, a protector of the poor, a foe to the tyrant, brave, gentle, and chivalrous, a man after the English peasant's own heart. Tradition says that he was buried at the spot where his last arrow stood in the turf. A stone was set up at its head, and on it was a graven inscription. Here, underneath this little stone, lies Robert, Earl of Huntington, never archer as he so good, and people called him Robin Hood. Such outlaws as he and his men will England never see again. After death, his company was broken up, and no record is kept of the end of any among them save Little John. And the grave at that famous outlaw is a disputed spot. England, Scotland, and Ireland contend for the honor of his death and burial. In each country a site is pointed out as that of Little John's grave. Some authorities give the pride of place to the village of Heathersedge in Derbyshire, where there is a long and wide grave, which when once opened, was found to contain some bones of uncommon size. It is marked by a great stone at the head and foot, and tradition declares that should anyone be so daring as to move the bones, he would become a most unlucky man until they were restored, when his troubles would cease. And so peace to the ashes of these famous yeomen and mighty outlaws, Robin Hood and Little John. And so we have continued to the tradition and listened and read the stories of Robin Hood and his men. I hope you enjoyed this book. It's one of my favorites. It's so fun, and if he existed, he was quite a man. And so I don't know what we're going to read next. I will hopefully have a new book to read for you tomorrow. So let's hope that I do. In the meantime, stay well. May God bless you. Goodbye.